My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old and I work as a nurse. Last month, I attended my stepsister's wedding reception. I wore a plain dress and kept mostly to myself. But during the dinner, my stepsister rose from her chair, pointed straight at me and laughed. "This is my stepsister," she announced to the groom's family. "She's nothing but a plain old nurse." A handful of people at the table laughed along. I didn't react. I didn't say a word in my own defense. I simply held my smile. But then the groom's father began looking at me with an intensity that felt different from ordinary curiosity. He stared the way a person stares when a face pulls at something buried deep in their memory. After a long pause, he leaned forward and spoke carefully. "Wait, aren't you the nurse who—" He never finished the sentence. And in that moment, every single conversation at the table stopped cold. Before I tell you what really happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The reception hall was already alive with noise when I walked in. Music drifted through the air, champagne glasses caught the light, and laughter filled every corner of the room. My stepsister Lily had always known how to command a room. Tonight, she had it completely. The venue was stunning. Warm golden light draped from the ceiling like something out of a magazine. White blossoms covered every table, and standing right in the middle of it all was Lily, dressed in a brilliant white gown, glowing like the evening had been built entirely around her. I lingered near the entrance for a moment, holding a small wrapped gift. I had dressed simply that night. Nothing expensive, nothing eye-catching, just something comfortable and unassuming. I hadn't come expecting anyone's attention. Honestly, that had always been the way things were between Lily and me. We shared a roof growing up, but our childhoods looked nothing alike. After my father passed, my mother married Lily's father, and on paper, we became one family. But the walls of that house told a different story. Lily grew up surrounded by comfort. Private schooling, designer wardrobes, vacations overseas. I spent those same years picking up part-time work wherever I could, putting myself through college and eventually earning my nursing license. I never once felt bitter about it. My work gave me something more valuable than status. It gave me purpose. There is something quietly profound about being present with people during their hardest moments, about being the steady hand when everything else is falling apart. But Lily never understood that kind of life. To her, a person's worth was measured in titles, money, and the impression they left in a room. And tonight, her wedding was the ultimate proof of everything she believed in. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, carrying trays of drinks. A small band filled the background with soft, elegant music. All around me, guests sat in tailored suits and sparkling earrings, speaking in the easy way that people do when they're very comfortable in expensive rooms. I found a quiet chair near the far end of one of the long tables and settled in. A few relatives gave me small waves. Most didn't seem to notice I had arrived. I didn't take it personally. I'm not someone who needs to be noticed. From where I sat, I watched Lily move through the crowd. She looked genuinely happy. Her new husband, Mark, stayed right beside her, guiding her from guest to guest with a calm, steady hand. He seemed like a grounded man, quieter than Lily, more measured. Not the kind of person I would have expected her to choose. After about 20 minutes, the first dinner course began. Guests settled back into their chairs. Plates were set down and the room shifted into the easy rhythm of a wedding meal. That's when Lily stood up. She tapped her glass lightly and the soft ringing spread across the room. "Everyone," she called out warmly. The conversations faded. "I want to introduce someone to Mark's family." She turned her head and looked straight at me. I felt the attention of the table follow her gaze. My chest tightened just slightly, but I kept my expression open. "Emily," Lily said, waving me over with a bright smile. "Come here a moment." Refusing would have made things awkward, so I stood and walked toward the main table. Lily placed a hand on my shoulder when I arrived. Her smile looked warm to anyone who didn't know her. I knew her. That smile was the one she had used since childhood. The one that always arrived just before she said something designed to land at another person's expense. She turned toward the groom's family. "This," she said, gesturing at me, "is my stepsister." Then she paused just long enough to hold the room's attention. She's just a nurse." A few guests laughed politely. Someone murmured something like, "Oh, how sweet." I felt that old familiar wave move through my chest. But my face stayed still. I smiled. I had understood long ago that reacting to Lily only handed her exactly what she wanted. I thought that would be the end of it, a small, forgettable moment at a crowded table. But then something shifted. Across from me, the groom's father had stopped eating entirely. He was an older man, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet sharpness in his eyes that comes from a long life carefully lived. At first, I assumed he was simply listening to the table conversation, but as the seconds passed, I realized he wasn't listening at all. He was looking at me. Not the way people look at strangers, the way they look at someone they almost recognize. Around him, the table continued normally. Glasses were lifted, someone nearby made a joke, a waiter refilled a few cups. But the older man had grown still. He set his fork down slowly and leaned back in his chair, working through something in his mind. Mark caught his father's expression. "Dad, you all right?" "Yes," the older man said quietly. "I'm fine." But his attention remained somewhere else entirely. Lily hadn't noticed any of this. She was already talking about the honeymoon. "Rome first," she said happily, "then the Amalfi Coast. We deserve something truly unforgettable." Guests smiled and raised their glasses. The waiter brought the next course. Music drifted up again from the band. Everything looked exactly like a wedding reception should. But the groom's father was still thinking. After a moment, he turned slightly toward his son. "What did she say her stepsister's name was?" "Emily," Mark answered. The older man repeated it under his breath, the way you repeat a word when you're trying to match it to something you can't quite reach. Lily smiled. "Don't worry too much about Emily. She practically lives inside hospitals." A few polite laughs followed. The groom's father didn't join them. Instead, he looked toward me again. His expression wasn't suspicious or unfriendly. It was the expression of someone standing at the edge of a memory, reaching for it. "I'm sorry," he said, addressing me directly. "Have we crossed paths somewhere before?" The question landed unexpectedly. I paused. "I'm not certain," I said. "I meet a great many people through work." He nodded slowly. "That would make sense." He looked down at the table again, still working at something. For a moment he seemed about to speak, then seemed to decide the memory wasn't ready yet. "You really think you know her?" Mark asked quietly. "I'm not sure," his father admitted. "There's just something about her face." Lily waved a hand. "Oh, honestly, Emily isn't exactly a celebrity." A few guests smiled at that. But this time the laughter felt uncertain, because the older man's expression hadn't changed. He rubbed the side of his jaw slowly, then looked at me once more. "It's strange," he said, almost to himself. "I have the feeling I've seen you during one of the most significant moments of my life." The table fell quieter. Even Lily paused mid-sentence. Then the band launched into something louder, and the mood of the room lurched sideways. Guests clapped, and a wave of people moved toward the dance floor. The moment scattered. Lily grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him up. "Perfect timing," she said with a laugh, and just like that, the table emptied. The groom's father stood more slowly. Before stepping away, he looked at me once more. "I'm certain of it," he said quietly. "We've met. Somewhere that mattered." Then he walked off to join the others. For the rest of that hour, I sat with that thought turning in my mind. The music played on, guests danced and toasted and laughed. From across the room, I noticed the groom's father a few times, standing slightly apart from the crowd, his gaze drifting in my direction. Whatever was working through his memory hadn't let him go. When the band paused for a break, people drifted back to their tables. The older man returned to his seat and lowered himself into the chair. Something in his posture had changed. The uncertainty was gone. He looked like a man who had finally found what he was searching for. He turned to face me. "Emily," he said. "Yes," I replied. A brief silence passed between us. 3 years ago," he said carefully, "were you working at St. Mary's Hospital?" My breath caught. "Yes," I said, "I was." He exhaled slowly, the way someone breathes when a weight finally lifts. "I knew it," he said softly. Mark looked between us. Knew what, Dad? The older man turned to his son. His voice was measured, but full of something held back. 3 years ago, he began, I was in a very serious car accident. The table grew still. They rushed me to the emergency ward in critical condition, but the roads into the city had been shut down that night because of a large protest. Most of the doctors couldn't get through for hours. Nearby guests stopped their side conversations and leaned in. For close to 6 hours, he continued, there was one nurse who never left my side. He looked at me steadily. That nurse was Emily. The table went completely silent. She tracked my breathing, she monitored my pulse, she kept talking to me through all of it, keeping me conscious, keeping me present. She never once stepped away. He looked at his son. If she had, I don't believe I would have made it until the doctors arrived. Mark stared at me. You saved his life. I was doing my job, I said. The groom's father shook his head. You were doing far more than your job. Then he turned slowly toward Lily. The warmth drained from his voice. Not cruelty, just honesty, plain and unadorned. You introduced her as just a nurse, he said. The room was silent in a way that felt different from before. You ought to be more careful with those words, he said quietly, when you're talking about someone who keeps people alive. Lily's face had gone pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. For the first time all evening, she had no follow-up, no deflection, no smile to reach for. The groom's father looked back at me. If you hadn't been there that night, he said, I wouldn't be sitting at this table today. I wouldn't have seen my son marry. Mark came around the table and stood in front of me. He extended his hand. Thank you, he said. I really mean that. Around the table, guests were murmuring. A few looked quietly embarrassed. One older woman near the end of the table looked at Lily with the kind of expression that needed no words at all. I felt the heat of being looked at by everyone and wanted nothing more than to redirect it. Like I said, I told them gently, I was just doing my job. And you did it, the groom's father said, better than anyone had a right to expect. The band started up again. The reception found its rhythm once more. But the air at that table had shifted permanently. People who had chuckled earlier were no longer laughing. The way they looked at me had changed, not with pity or curiosity, but with something closer to recognition. Lily stayed quiet for the rest of the night. The brightness she had carried since the first moment of the evening had gone dim. She didn't look at me directly again. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't fight its way in. It simply surfaces, quietly and completely, at exactly the moment it's needed. And sometimes the person a room has overlooked all evening turns out to be the reason someone in that room is still alive. Never measure a person by the simplicity of their title, especially when that title means they show up for strangers at their very worst and stay.